Rick Phibbs had hernia surgery and he can't shovel. So I said, you know what, in the sky, the snow's really heavy. I'll just do your driveway.
I'd like to call this council committee meeting to order. This is the continuation of the council meeting that started last Monday night, February the 5th. We're going to finish it off this evening, I hope. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, your worship.
Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest with respect to this particular agenda? There being none, notices of upcoming public meetings, I think we've already gone through that. Do I need to do it again, Madam Clerk? Okay. So we did the public meeting, and now we're at the Planning and Development Services portion of the agenda, and that is Councillor Passero.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Planning and Development Services is now in session. We don't have any presentations or delegations. First up is report PDS 10-2018, application for draft plan of subdivision and combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, Harbortown Village Subdivision 800460, Ontario Limited. Fred Costabel, Upper Canada Consultants, Jennifer Vita, looking for a mover for that report. Moved by Councillor McDermott and seconded by Councillor Zanko. So that report is on the floor for comments or questions of staff. Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me just get it up here on my... I think the first question I need to know is last week during the public meeting, I asked the consultant and I asked the lawyer that was present as well if the developer would expand the scope of that they were going to discuss things with FLAP about the building materials and bird safe technology and stuff. And I asked if they would expand that to include location of the tower. And I'm just wondering if they discussed that with FLAP, or if they discussed it with the developer, and if the developer is okay with that.
Mr. Brady, is that something that would come forward as part of the recommendation report that we will see up next in this process?
Through you to Councillor Lubberts. Yes, it will be discussed in the recommendation report, and certainly FLAP guidelines will be utilized to position the location of the condominium tower within the block as it's defined.
Councillor Luberts?
On page 5 of the report, in the first section there, they're talking about rezoning the lands. But I guess the question that I have to ask is, are we getting any community benefits for the height and density?
Mr. Brady?
The simple answer to that question is the community benefits are the tower itself. There is nothing in our official plan that calls for those kinds of items. When we dealt with the tower in Bay Beach, that dealt with the town providing the land. In this case, that's not the case.
Councillor Luberts?
Providing the land, I don't understand what providing the land for the height and depth.
In exchange for providing the land during Bay Beach, that was what was considered under Section 59. Somebody has to remind me of that. It's been a while, but of the Planning Act, that was the community benefit portion. That's the reason we were able to get community benefits, was we were actually providing the land as part of the equation, but there's no public property in play as far as this development.
Yeah, I don't think that was the deal with the height and density. Height and density is under Section 37, I think, of the Planning Act. And that is strictly for height and density, the community benefits. Anything else with Bay Beach, that was all.
Mr. Brady, does the community benefits come into play if there's no municipal land in the equation? Or second part of that question would be what else would trigger community benefits?
Community benefits can come into play under Section 37 if there are official plan policies which identify that community benefits will be utilized when there's height given above a certain standard. For example, in Niagara Falls, when hotels are above, and I believe it's 30 stories, the 30 stories are provided for, but the height above that, there are community benefits. We do not have those in our official plan, so the utilization of that section is inappropriate in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Councillor Luberts?
I'm going to need some further verification on how that works then. If we had that with Bay Beach and it wasn't in our official plan, then how did we use it then, and now we can't use it now? I don't get it.
Mr. Brady, can you just reiterate what triggered that during the Bay Beach process?
In the Bay Beach process, the council of the day was providing land to the developer, and for that land, instead of purchasing it, there were community benefits provided. So therefore, the trade-off for the land was the community benefits, and that was identified within an agreement which had been signed by both parties. In this case, the town is not providing any land for this development, and therefore there is no basis for community benefits.
Councillor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think that's where everybody got confused with Bay Beach, and that there was $2.5 million or $2.7 million worth of property that the town was giving to the developer. In exchange for that, they were going to provide, they were going to do different things with the property. Then the height and density is where you get your community benefits. So what they were trying to do is they were trying to mix things up and say that the community benefits came with the land. Well, if the community benefits came with the land, then where were we getting the height and density? Where were we getting the community benefits from the heights and density? And that was the argument that we constantly had with Bay Beach, and you can't do it both ways. If you have height and density, you have height and density.
I'm looking not to have those arguments again tonight. If we can
That's
speak,
right.
yeah, if we can speak to.
I'm not trying to argue with it tonight, but what I'm saying is.
Let's speak to this report.
There is a policy and there is a provision that if you have height and density in exchange for the height the community can get community benefits.
So you-
And
so
I'm
you'd
not
like some-
seeing that here.
Okay, so you'd
and
like
I'd to
further
get a
expansion
little
of that
more clarification.
when, okay, in the recommendation report when it comes back. Anything further, Councilor Luberts?
Yeah, just in, it's relevant to the development, and I see that on our town website, we've had some, we have some communications there through our communications department. So I think the question I'd like to ask is, what's the total size of the development, property-wise?
Ms. Stolch? There we go.
Thank you. Through you, total size of parcel area is 14.659 hectares.
And the property that's going to be conveyed to the public is 2.8?
It's 2.842.
So in the report that I read today, it said that 80% of the woodlot was going to be maintained. It seems to me like,
80% of the old growth forest.
how does that work out?
Where are we defining as the old growth forest, Ms. Stolch?
Through you to the councillor, I don't necessarily have a map to show you where the old growth forest is, but it was identified in the environmental impact study where that line is.
This would be the lands almost immediately adjacent to the current or within the current trail system, but not necessarily the lands that had been cleared for the fairgrounds previously.
Generally,
Roughly.
roughly in that location. It is in the EIS.
Councilor Luberts, on page 16 of the report, there's an aerial photo of the old fairgrounds property. An aerial photo taken when it was the fairgrounds property with the development overlaid on top. And I would say that the balance of the old growth forest is falling within that green area that's going to be conveyed. The balance of the property, you can see where there weren't really any trees circa 1930. That would be everything else. Ms. Stolch?
Through you to the councillor, that's correct. If you can see this map here, unfortunately I don't have a larger version for you, but it's generally in the southern portion. And like I said, and as detailed in the report, it covers about 80% of that old growth forest area, the Environmental Protection Block 107.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Luberts. Councilor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if I can get some clarification with respect to the public ownership of the protection block and whether, how it plays out with respect to who would have that ownership, the town or NPCA.
Mr. Brady, how do we see that process moving forward?
At the present time, there was there was a suggestion by the solicitor for the developer that the block be identified and that the lands would either be bought, they're not to be conveyed, they're to be acquired. Acquired by the town or acquired in part by the town or acquired in total by the Conservation Authority, and that before the registration of the subdivision, that would have to occur.
Councilor Butler?
Okay, I didn't, I thought for some reason it was being donated to the town and not for purchase, so that was my misunderstanding. I wonder, though, if I can make a comment.
There is, can I just ask Mr. Brady, so there is a portion that is being given as part of our parkland dedication bylaw, which sits at 5%. So they can either donate 5% of property or cash in lieu. So that regardless would have to come to the town. In this case, they're looking at giving an additional 15% as it stands now into some form of public entity, either us or the NPCA.
Mr. Chair, I think that's not completely accurate. Maybe Mr. Brady can clarify that.
Sure, Mr. Brady?
There would be three components of the 7 acres. There's about 2 acres. I'm going to use acres as opposed to hectares because I have the numbers in my head. There's about 2 acres which are immediately adjacent to the Friendship Trail, which are identified within our official plan currently as environmental protection. Those lands, the town would ask the developer to give to us for nothing.
Is that over and above, where would that equate to about as the 5% figure, Mr.
That would
Brady?
be, then we would ask for 5% on top of that.
Okay.
As land dedication, which would leave approximately 2.5 acres-ish that the town would have to acquire. So some would be given, if you will, some would be acquired, but even the 5% that we would take in park dedication, there's a cost associated with that. Because if we take it as land, that's fine, we're allowed to do that. But if we don't take it as land, we can then charge a 5% cash in lieu on the building permit. Okay, so it's not reasonable to suggest that the developer is offering the property to be given to the town. There's a portion that we would take. There's a portion that would be 5% cash in lieu, and there would be a portion that we would acquire. If the Conservation Authority, on the other hand, acquired all of the property, then the town would not have to put out either any money, nor would the town have to utilize its 5% dedication, and therefore the town would be able to benefit financially by having 5% cash in lieu as part of the development.
And the NPCA purchase would also include the 2 acres that would have been conveyed to us as part of the official plan.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Brady, for that clarification. Just a comment. I did, after the Monday night meeting at the open house, our public house, I did go to the lands the next morning, and I did travel down the path, and I ran into a few people that were enjoying the path that wasn't part of the town property. And they were grateful that they were able to utilize that path and respectful of the development that was going to progress forward, and hopeful that it would progress forward so that the town of Fort Erie would take that property into consideration for ownership. So I'm just, one final question. What, I guess if the NPCA takes over that property, then will that still be open to the public?
Mr. Brady?
To answer your question directly, I would assume so, yes. I don't know of any Conservation Authority lands which are not open to the public. There's an additional block, just to put this all completely into perspective. The lands on the northern part of this property is 7 acres, which is what we're talking for, because there's part of the plan of subdivision. There's also lands to the south of the Friendship Trail, which are owned by the developer, but are not part of this application, so we don't have access to them. My understanding is the Conservation Authority could well be acquiring those as well. So we have currently a 7-acre block out there right now, which is our park. There's 7 acres of woodland that we could add to it, which would make about a 14-acre holding. But if the Conservation Authority also acquired the lands to the south, some of which is water lots, that would add another approximately 23 acres to the equation. And at that point, we would have a very significant natural environment area under public ownership, perhaps in 2 different publics, but nonetheless in public ownership.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mayor Redekop?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions with respect to the report. And the first one relates to the 15-meter corridor along Dominion Road. Is that going to be 15 meters from the existing Dominion Road road allowance boundary? Or if that's expanded, would it be from the expanded width of Dominion Road?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor, the 15-meter buffers from their property line, and it's from the expanded, the road allowance along Dominion Road, so it's 15 meters from that.
So we had, if I
Property.
might, Mr. Chair, we had a situation in Crystal Beach where the municipality, I guess, requested a road widening of Rebstock, and the developer was supposed to have the buildings a certain distance from the road allowance. But that didn't take into account the fact that then the owner was going to be dedicating some land to the municipality for road widening. I guess my question is, if the region requests road widening, is this a 15-meter buffer from whatever the expanded road width is? So that it's 15 meters, not 15 meters from where the road is today, 15 meters from where the road might be expanded.
Through you to the mayor, my understanding is it would be 15 meters. If they took a road widening, it'd be 15 meters, only because the environmental consultant recommended 15 meters because of the eastern wood pewee, thank you,
So,
their habitat buffer
But to
area.
clarify, I don't believe the region has asked for a road widening.
Correct, I haven't seen any requests come through for that.
so if they do, it's 15 meters. This will be a 15-meter wide environmental conservation strip.
That's correct.
With respect to the archaeological assessment, was there any indication of War of 1812 activity in this particular site?
Ms. Dolch?
I may have to get back to you on that, I don't recall.
I'd appreciate that.
but
One
I
of the
can.
speakers that was out here the other night made reference to that, and I wasn't aware of that. So if you could make note, I'd appreciate it.
So we'll bring that back in the recommendation report, Mayor.
Sure.
Okay.
Then on page 5, that deals with the zoning changes that are being requested. My question is, we have these zonings, R2 zone, RM1 zone, RM2 zone, which we've recently adopted. So why would these be modified? What's the rationale for that?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor. They've requested an R2 zone, which isn't normally what we would use for a new subdivision zone, but they did want to provide a bit larger lot size in this area, one to provide something for the neighborhood, especially those that are abutting onto it. So they wanted to go with the larger lot size rather than going with the smaller R2A's lot sizes. If they did go with an R2A zoning for a new subdivision, which is normally our standard, they really only would require one change, which is the rear covered porches. But it would also allow them a larger height for their building and things like that. So we were okay with the R2 zone because it did restrict some of the development that could occur on the site.
So if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So the requirement for the R2 zone is 510 square meters minimum lot area. The developer is requesting 500 square meters, but if this was what we would typically require for a subdivision, you're saying it would be smaller than 500 meters? Square
That's
meters.
correct.
Okay. And with respect to the RM1 zone, there's a change there with respect to the required and the proposed maximum lot coverage. What's that all about?
What we've been finding with the RM1 zone, more with coverage, is that now if you do a covered porch or anything like that, we have to include it in coverage, which when we originally did our zoning provisions for coverage, we didn't factor that in. But anything that's covered is now increasing our lot coverage a bit. So we have noticed a number of minor variances in that regard as well for covered porches coming through.
And so with respect to this particular request, the interior unit is the same for the maximum lot coverage. There's a change in the exterior unit. So exterior means those lots that are on the exterior of this plan?
The exterior lot means those on the corners, and a lot of times those will have wraparound porches and things like that, facing two street corners.
Do we have anything up here on the,
I'm going to say, how many lots would that apply to, Ms. Dolch? I'm trying to fast track to a schedule in the agenda here.
Yeah, if we reference, so in this case, if we reference Appendix 2, there's two blocks, Block 80 and Block 81, which will have an exterior unit because they will face Street D.
okay. Is it possible to get something up on the screen? I don't know if you've got it right here now.
No, I don't have anything with
Just it
me.
would be very helpful for us as we're going through this, I think. Okay, so that's, you've responded to that. And then the regulations for the apartment dwellings RM2 zone. So this is slightly smaller minimum lot area, so those would be smaller units. That's at the bottom of page 5.
The bottom of, oh, sorry.
Page 5 of the report,
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, so what happens here is the lot area has been reduced. So in terms of how many units you have on the property versus the number of square meters you're going to have per unit is being reduced. That's correct.
So this permits more units in the same size building.
Footprint, correct.
Okay, and then on the next page, with respect to the RM2 zone, we apparently have a permission of a 9-story building,
Through you
that zone,
to the mayor, that's correct.
or 26 meters, whichever is greater. What's being proposed is 10 stories or 30 meters.
That is correct.
And I think we established last week that there is an 8-story building in town.
That's correct, Albany Place.
I think Albany Place is 6.
Oh,
Maybe
sorry,
the Lakeview is.
Nope, Albany is,
Albany.
Lakeview is 6. Lakeview and Bridges. Yeah.
Okay. And we've established that in terms of firefighting, that's not an issue because I guess beyond a certain height, the firefighters have, I mean, it's the building that has to have the mechanisms. Is that correct, Chief?
Chief, could you comment on how do we attack a fire within an apartment building? Because it was something that was raised a couple of times during the public meeting. Maybe we could answer that now for the benefit of residents rather than waiting for the recommendation report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. We have 2 100-foot Sutphen platforms, so they can reach 100 feet. This would be larger than that. We'd have a difficult time with Albany Place reaching the top of it. We have an apartment building protocol for how we would fight a fire, how we communicate to the residents in that fire. So although it's different than fighting a normal residential fire, it's we do have and practice the methodology in which those fires would get fought.
And I presume that there are, if I might, Mr. Chair, I presume that there are some type of safety regulations that would apply to a building that's beyond a certain height, beyond 100 feet or 30 meters. Would that be correct?
Chief?
There certainly is the safety standards for alarms and sprinkler systems, et cetera, are in place. For example, any building built after 1999 must have 100 PSI water at the top of it available. So Also, it talks about the number of hose cabinets, the methodology in which the alarms are activated, et cetera, how the stairwells are pressurized to keep smoke out of them. The standard speaks to all of those.
Right, okay. And those are all building code issues? I
That's
presume?
correct.
If I might, Mr. Chair, with
Yes.
respect to the apartment building or the tower that's being proposed, that, I'd asked questions about the shadowing of that before. Have there been any studies done with respect to the shadowing implications for this particular proposed building?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor. No, there hasn't been any shadowing studies done. Normally, we request a shadow study when it's adjacent to an existing residence or existing neighborhood. In this case, the way the building was structured, it was located in the middle, and we didn't ask for any shadowing studies at the time.
So we don't believe that there'll be any negative impact regarding shadow on existing residential? It would just be interior to the proposed development?
That's correct.
And so can we, before you go, so can we presume that the developer has taken into account what the implications might be for other units in this plan of subdivision, other single-family units or townhouse units that are going to be within the shadow?
Through you to the mayor, we can make sure that it's communicated to them and confirm that.
They're here, I'm guessing that they're listening, they're writing. I don't know. So, if this, I guess what you're suggesting, if I might, Mr. Chair, I guess what you're suggesting is a shadowing study isn't really necessary here because this building isn't affecting any existing residents.
Through you to the mayor. And those residents that would purchase would be aware of the tower located where it is in the block.
Yeah, I wonder if they'd be aware of what the implications of shadowing are. I don't know that they'd be thinking about that.
How do we normally convey something to a property purchaser through a developer? I know that we do certain things as far as registering on title or making sure notices are given. What would be done in this regard?
Through you, thank you. We could look at clauses registered on title, warning clauses to warn residents of the impact of shadows, and we can look into some of those things further for the recommendation report. Some things to deal with.
That would be fine. I think that would be helpful. If I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
On page 7 of the report, there's a reference then to the environmental impact study, and then some of the there's a chart that has potential impacts, proposed mitigation measures, net effects. So the environmental impact study does in fact show where the significant woodlot is. I don't know why they would call it old growth forest in here. I'm confident that none of this is old growth forest. I'm confident that most of it, any of those big old trees would have been built sometime around the time the park was constructed, because I can't imagine that an amusement park would have been constructed and there would have been too many trees left. So I think that's an unfortunate reference in the report. Nonetheless, there is a very mature old forest in this vicinity, and there is a chart that shows where that significant woodlot is. And that significant woodlot, it appears, is slightly larger than the environmental protection area that is shown in the plans here. In fact, on the east side, it goes almost parallel to the south limit of the stormwater management pond. And not quite to the pond, but in that vicinity. So my question is, why would we not be trying to protect the 100% of that old woodlot, significant woodlot, which is what it is called, as opposed to 80%?
Ms. Dolch, prior to the mayor's question there, can you just answer something for me? In proposed mitigation measures, it says preservation of 70% of mature woodland area. Have we moved the bar since then to get us to the 80?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
It has been modified. There was a slight modification to the moving the line to the north for the environmental protection block since the environmental study was done.
Okay, thank you. And to the mayor's question then, why are we not aiming for 100%?
There are a couple of factors there. There is the connection of Lakeshore Road, which, from a planning perspective, was good. We wanted to see good connectivity through the site, up from the existing neighborhood into the new neighborhood, which would go through that area you're speaking of. There's no other way to swing that road because of the stormwater management pond that's located there. So there is a bit of that corner that's going to be removed. There was, they did provide the most significant portions of that, and that's what the environmental impact study recommended. And we've obviously increased that area since then, but so those are what we took into consideration. So that's generally the main reason why it's probably not 100%. We do want that connectivity between Lakeshore Road, the continuation up into the new community, rather than a dead-end block.
Okay, and I noticed, it just was actually brought to my attention that one of the blocks south of the stormwater management pond is actually being set aside for a wildlife corridor purposes?
Through you to the mayor. Yes, that is correct. We requested that based on public comment on the north-south corridor not being provided, not a link from the environmental protection block to the pond, because originally there were single detached dwellings proposed there. So we did propose a block to get the animals and other things that could move, although it is across a roadway, into the stormwater pond, because they are planning to enhance that for some of the species.
Right, and I think that's admirable. I think there are a lot of things that the developer has been trying to do here, and I know I'm familiar with the extent of the negotiations, and I do want to acknowledge that the developer has been very sensitive to some of these things, maybe not as sensitive as some people in the community might want, and maybe not as generous as the mayor might want. But I like the idea of the corridor, and I know that there's a strip alongside the back of those houses along Street C, I guess it is. And I know that there's an intention for this corridor to go somewhere. For it to go to the lake, it would have to cross a road to get to the environmental protection lands, the way this is currently structured. And for any animals to get from the stormwater management pond area, they'd have to go through that narrow strip across Street, that D? A. Across Street A, presumably through Street, along Street D, to get to the wetlands across Dominion Road, which is another hazard. So how efficient is that corridor really going to be?
Unfortunately, you do have to cross roads. It's the only way we can do it in this case. So we do have a couple road crossings, but I do believe there's, a lot of the, and we can speak with the environmental consultants, but a lot of the animals and critters hopefully will remain in the stormwater pond and start to forage in that area. You may still see some going to the north to the pond, or to the wetland area, but right now they're still crossing Dominion Road as it is. So I don't know if
They are crossing Dominion
Yeah,
Road, and that's
which is
because there's bush on one side, currently there's bush on the other side. That will change, I understand that. So I would imagine that you'll have raccoons, skunks, coyotes, foxes. I don't know that you're gonna get the deer coming into that area, but Mr. Brady mentioned something interesting when he was talking in response to one of Councillor Lubert's questions, and that had to do with the land, the environmental protection land, and how this could play out with the town or with the Conservation Authority if they were involved. And he mentioned that there was going to be, see if I can capture this, or maybe it was when Councillor Butler was speaking. Yes, there was going to be 2 acres immediately adjacent to the environmental protection lands that the town would ask for and would receive as dedication without cost.
Through you, the 2 acres is the environmental protection land that's shown in our official plan. That's correct. We can.
Right. So if in fact something were to happen and the Conservation Authority were successful in their effort, and I know that that's quite premature, what about the possibility, or has there been any consideration given to something that would facilitate a corridor to the north of this development, so that there would actually be some natural area that animals could come from the north through to this little, I don't know if it's 10 meters or not, the 10-meter strip that runs along the houses that are on the east side of Street C? Is that 10 meters? I can't tell exactly, but, you know, once they get through that little strip where there are houses on street, at the corner of Street C and A.
6-meter strip.
6 meters, okay, so once they get through there, then they're in quite a green space where the pond is. Then there's a corridor that would take them down to the south end of where the pond is. They may have to get across a street to get into the environmental protection area, but I wonder if there's latitude for some type of green corridor at the north limit. I'm gonna leave that with you because I think that's something that may enhance this.
That
So-
would be where we're currently showing block 48, Mayor? Or you're looking at 49 right on the corner?
I'm looking at, no, I can't even know what these block numbers are. Looks like, I think I've got 80. Is block 80 immediately to the west of Street D?
D, yes. Okay.
I'm looking
I
at
thought
some-
you were looking adjacent to the pond, but yeah, if you're looking further north, it's block 80.
Yeah, I'm looking at something in that area. Otherwise, the animals actually have to come through Street D. I don't know that will happen. I mean, I've seen coyotes walking through streets in Crescent Park. So that will happen, but you won't get the deer walking down that street. So anyways, if I may, can I just leave that with you? If I might, Mr.
Can I just,
Chair.
I'm just going to poll balance of council to see if there's anybody else who'd like to speak.
Sure, yes, of course. Of
Thank you.
course.
No? Mayor, continue on. You have them riveted.
Pardon?
You have them riveted.
I doubt that very much. So in the report here on page 8, in this page with respect to the potential impacts, there's a reference in the flora and fauna to 4 regionally rare herbaceous plants. Are you familiar with that, Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor, no, I'm not overly familiar with the details on that.
I'd be interested in knowing what would be required to protect those plants, where they're located, and what might be required on that, if that's possible.
That's something we could flesh out in the recommendation report.
Through you, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now I'm at page 10.
If I might, on that system, one of the identify the exact location of rare plants is because
Right.
the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Conservation Authority have found that once they're identified, certain members of the public seem to want to collect them. So we tend not to identify those within public documents.
So
Could you circulate something then in confidence to council, Ms. Dolch or Mr. Brady, just to get us the information on that question?
It would be easier to do it that way.
Yeah, and I don't need to know exactly where they are. I'm just wondering what the mitigation measures might be.
Certainly.
So then under the archaeological comments on page 10, there's a reference to a protective buffer to be cleared of archaeological concern. So, can you explain that?
Through you to the mayor. Yes, a protective buffer is usually identified around a site. And those are areas, should they choose to just protect the area, that buffer is also a protected area where no development can occur. In this case, the sites are within the environmental protection area, some of them, so the buffer isn't a big factor. But if you're going to develop within that buffer, you do have to do the further archaeological work to make sure that site, you'd have to do your stage 3 and 4 in order to clear that.
So if I might, Mr. Chair, as an example, when we had June Chip provide us with a presentation the other day, she identified some locations where there are some remnants of the amusement park that are outside of the environmental protected area, may have been identified in the archaeological study. So there would have to be some further work on those before development could take place where they're located?
My understanding is those sites that Mrs. Chip referred to weren't part of those protected sites that were identified in the archaeological assessment.
But the entire area was looked at,
The entire area was looked at.
but they just weren't deemed to
They
be
just
of
weren't-
archaeological significance for the
Correct.
purpose of.
There was a couple sites that were identified that needed to continue on to a stage 3 and 4, and those were identified in the study.
So, I would appreciate some clarification on that, Mr. Chair, because I would imagine the reference to Erie Beach Park site would have to do with foundations as an example of rides and buildings. We've got a couple of photographs here that indicate there was a train station which is now going to be outside of the environmental protection area. And then we've got something about this chute. So I just wonder if we could get some clarification on that. When we get the recommendation report, if we get some clarification on whether those qualify or not, and if they don't, why not them and some of these others do?
Mr. Brady
We
did want to respond.
We certainly can. All of everything that's archaeologically significant that's been identified within the archaeological report that's outside of the environmental protection area will be looked at in more detail as part of a stage 3. If as part of that stage 3 it's determined that the matter is sufficiently archaeological importance, one of two things can happen. It either stays there or it's removed. The vast majority of stage 4s remove the archaeological, and it's taken away and it's stored for future archaeological research. So stage 3 will define it in more detail, and that's where you'll actually see the archaeologists out on site cutting into the ground and, sieving and that kind of stuff, sort of, remind you of Egypt. But the stage 4 is the actual removal of the archaeological, whatever that's of importance, and it's taken away and it's stored. As a matter of fact, as a part of the licensing requirements of archaeologists, they need to store this material for an indeterminate period of time as per government regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
I wouldn't think that they would be storing concrete foundations, so I would imagine if they're removed, they're simply removed to permit development. Would that be accurate?
Mr. Brady, if they meet a certain threshold, it doesn't really matter what they are, they're getting stored?
If they meet a certain threshold, there are beams which are in storage, and there's other things. What will be determined is are they of sufficient archaeological value to be put into storage?
Okay, well, that should be interesting. With respect to the EIS, was this done in contemplation of a 10-story building?
The EIS?
Mr. Brady?
Yes. Okay. And within the subdivision itself, will there likely be fiber optics installed by whoever's putting them in? The answer
I
is-
would assume yes.
I'm seeing a head going up and down, which means yes. Okay, thank you. I think that's very prudent. And there was reference in the report to the Postal Service, and I know that the federal government's going through some changes right now. I'm wondering if I know the report says that it would be community mailboxes, but I'm wondering if this is an area where there might be mail delivery. Is that still in flux, or is this definitely going to be community mailboxes?
Mr. Brady?
I've seen no subdivision that's gone in any part of Niagara or any other place that I've been involved with where community mailboxes haven't been the case. Of course, and I'm being a bit flippant, there won't be community mailboxes for the condo because they'll be right within the condo. But for the townhouses and for the single-family dwellings, it'll be community mailboxes.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I wonder if I could just ask a couple of questions about the proposed tower. So there was a comment made by one of the people that came out the other day that the appropriate design of the building tower could be a condition of site plan approval or a condition of subdivision approval. Mr. Chair?
Mr. Brady, what controls can we affect on the actual design and aesthetics of a building?
A number of controls. The way we'll start is we will identify, or at least it's proposed that we'll start in this fashion, a draft plan condition which will identify that this issue of design plus the issue of design in terms of the avian species will be dealt with at site plan control. So it will provide guidance through the draft plan of subdivision that will occur. At site plan control, we will look at such things as the actual location of the building, the design of the building, the windows that are going to be placed on the building, and also within FLAP and others. FLAP is the one that we've talked about, but we'll be looking at how can this building be designed so that A, it's a good urban design, and B, to minimize impacts of birds flying into it. I will tell you that more often than not, the problems with birds flying into buildings is at 3 stories and below, but nonetheless, it'll be viewed in its totality for this particular building, and then it will be implemented through site plan control, and that will then be a part of the building permit that will then be finalized for the property.
Thank you. If I might, Mr. Chair, then with respect to the block where this high-rise is to go, has the location yet been determined within that block?
No.
And what about the parking? Is there above-ground parking, or is this going to be sub-ground parking?
That also has not been determined.
But I understand the developer's quite firm in the location of the tower. And I wonder if Mr. Chair, if Mr. Brady can give us any insights as to the significance of the location.
Mr. Brady, what led staff to endorse this location for the tower block?
To be completely clear, we haven't endorsed it yet. We brought it forward, and the reasons that we believe that it's an appropriate location is that it can, one of the things that's also added to this particular condominium is the fact that on the first floor you can have retail. You can have a small Tim Hortons, or you could have a small drugstore, or those kinds of things. So we feel that being in close proximity to the trail system, it provides a method that we can provide services to those people who will be utilizing the trail. So we think that's an important component of this particular building. What we've been told, and I firmly believe, that from a marketing perspective, this is the most important location for this building. This will provide a substantial building in close proximity to the Lake Erie shoreline, something which has been talked about for years in this community. Provide a view both up and down the shoreline and a view into the woodlot. So that's an important consideration from a marketing perspective. We've also identified that this particular location is about as far away as you can get from any of the existing development in the area. There was a little diagram provided with arrows on it, which identified that this building is as far away from existing development as you could be and still provide for a substantial building. The neighbors seem to like that. The neighbors like the fact that that we are allowing single families associated with single families, then townhouses, and then moving up through to the apartment building site. This site is within walkable distance of transit. Transit is located on Dominion, and the typical walking perspective that you have from transit is 5 minutes. This site is within a 5-minute walk of transit on Dominion. Not necessarily a current transit stop, but those things are always in flux depending upon the demands of the neighborhood. So all in all, it represents both a good location from a planning perspective, and we also believe, and so does the developer believe, that it's a good location from a marketing perspective.
Mr. Chair, can I put in my objection to a drive-through Tim Hortons at this site?
If wishes, I would be more than happy to remove that from the zoning on the property.
Small victory, but a victory nonetheless. So would this subdivision likely be phased?
Mr. Brady, have those conversations occurred?
Very briefly, those conversations have occurred. My knowledge of this particular developer is such that I would anticipate that the road system would go in probably all at the same time, and that housing would start. Again, what I would anticipate is that certain builders would build certain forms of housing, because you rarely have the same builder that builds apartment buildings that builds townhouses. So the blocks would be sold off, and then you would have different developers moving on the site. My guess is it would probably take in the neighborhood of about 5 years to build out the site. And in terms of phasing, they may phase it, but this particular developer, based on past experience, tends to put in all of his sanitary and water and roads at the same time.
Thank you. So then, with respect to, just about finished, Mr. Chair, with respect to the extension of Lakeshore Road over to Street C, why is that necessary or advisable? Or is it?
Mr. Brady?
From a transportation perspective, that provides a linkage from Lake Shore over through and up into Dominion. It provides a significant connection. Originally, Lake Shore was to run parallel to the lake and connect over to Edgemere. That we decided was not appropriate given the wooded area and the significance of it. So it just catches the corner and then goes northward. It provides multiple outlets for this subdivision, and it provides for good connectivity for the people both within the subdivision and the people around the subdivision. The people around the subdivision won't have their road being the only road that has traffic on it, because it provides for a number of different ways in and out of the subdivision.
Thank you. So that makes sense. So the vehicular traffic is being dispersed, which will lessen the impacts, I guess, throughout the subdivision is the intent. With respect to, just a couple more questions, Mr. Chair. With respect to the birds, there was reference made to safe bird policies in Toronto and Markham. We don't have anything of that nature here, do we?
Mr. Brady?
At this time, no, we don't.
And I suppose that's a function of, well, maybe it's not. But if we have higher buildings, is that something that we should be looking at, Mr. Chair?
And even in the absence of higher buildings, if Mr. Brady's comment is correct at 3 stories or less, then would apply almost everywhere. Mr. Brady?
Given the information that I've heard from the public as a part of the presentations, there clearly is an interest in having the area at least within 2 kilometers-ish of the Lake Erie shoreline and perhaps the Niagara River shoreline. So if council wanted to direct staff to take some research in this area, I would certainly be open to that. It's not something I can do overnight. It's something that would need to be looked at, and if council has an interest in it, we could certainly look at that and bring back a report, but it's not something that would happen quickly, but we would happy to do it over time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then just some comments. I'm going to support the report and the recommendations in the report to move this forward. As I said, I know that the developer has been very cooperative with the municipality and with the people who have come out to public meetings to respond to as many of the concerns that have been raised as possible. We also heard some excellent presentations the other night from people who are in this community who are truly concerned about our natural heritage. And we have in our official plan policies that talk about the importance of our natural heritage. I think there are some things that we can do to make sure that developments, whether this one or future developments, really are in tune with what I think is the tone that we're trying to set in this municipality, which is we have rich natural heritage, and we have people that value very much the rich natural heritage, and many people move here because of that. So that we need to be thinking in terms, and there was a suggestion made that we need a plan to preserve our natural heritage areas. It's good that we have and did, and I think may still only be, or maybe the only municipality in Niagara that has a natural heritage inventory. That was done years ago, getting close to 20 years now, with the help of volunteers in this community. It's very important to have that type of thing. That changes from time to time, but I don't think we actually have a plan to preserve those natural heritage areas and make sure that we don't become complacent. We've talked about corridors for 20 years in this community in terms of one development to the next development in areas to the north of Garrison Road where there will be a lot of development. And sometimes we do that. This plan provides for that. I think it could be a more effective corridor, but that's just me. That's just the way I'm looking at it. But I've got to believe that there are many people who came out the other night who are thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. So that if we really want this community to develop in a unique fashion, if we really want to grow and still maintain the natural heritage features, the proximity to wildlife, and the importance of all the things that those of us who grew up here value, those who have come here value, and utilize this as a mechanism for our future prosperity, I think we need to be addressing these issues. This is an important development from the if only from the perspective that it's helped to highlight for us how important to the community this wildlife habitat is, whether it's birds, whether it's animals, and how valuable it is to our community and how important it should be to us if it isn't already. So I think going forward, there's still work that I think can be done with respect to this plan of subdivision. I do give the owner, the developers, a lot of credit for their attitude to date. I'm always optimistic that there are some more things that can be done, and I think they can be, because some of the changes that I'm trying to address, I do think make this a more valuable subdivision, more attractive to be able to market, and will really, I think, be a showpiece for the community. Can be, has the potential to be a showpiece for the community. Look, if we could leave this in a natural state, who wouldn't want to do that? But the reality is, this is within the urban boundary. Our official plan has designated this for residential development for at least 4 decades, since at least 1976. so that we know that that's about to happen. But I think we should mitigate as many of the environmental issues as we possibly can, and make sure that we're vigilant and become more proactive in terms of developing some policies that will help protect and preserve our natural heritage. Thank you for your patience, all of you.
You're welcome, Mr. Mayor. Seeing nothing further from any members of council, the recommendation then is that we receive the current report PDS 10-2018 for information purposes, and that we are directing staff to present a report on the proposed combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for the Harbortown Village, and that will come forward at a future meeting. Seeing nothing further, all in favor? That's carried. PDS 12-2018, proposed amendment to Town of Fort Erie official plan and zoning bylaw number 129-90, Crystal Beach and Birdie Street Public Schools, 145 Derby Road, and 3770 Hazel Streets. Looking for a mover, Councillor Zanko, and seconded by Councillor Nuts. Comments or questions on that report? Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple comments on this report. I'm glad that we're moving forward with doing something with these access buildings and working with the DSBNs who thus far have been very good partners with us in this community. Now, we had a presentation roughly about a month ago around budget time from the Beachcombers, and I think that we should definitely circulate this report, and Mr. maybe Cookett could look at doing so through our communications person to our groups that are out there in the community, and possibly we could band together several groups to bring together a community hub that would, I'm sure, be highly utilized in this area.
Thank you. Councillor Nutt. Seeing nothing. Mayor Redekop.
Sorry, I just had a question following up on Councillor Nutt's comments and the fact that we did have a delegation requesting that in the future, when these buildings come up for possible acquisition by the municipality, that we have a public consultation. But since Councillor Nutt mentioned community hubs, do we have the human resources here available to pursue the information that would be necessary in order for us to figure out who the potential partners are, what the possible sources of financing a community hub might be, what the potential uses are, that type of thing?
Mr. Cookett.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. The quick answer is no, we do not. Staff is overwhelmed with work. This would be a special project. I think we would need to get somebody in. I would suggest either a consultant or just on a contract basis. There are a lot of municipalities now looking at community hubs, and there's a lot of work to be done. We've been trying to do some work internally. We've been looking at funding opportunities and locations, but I think we can do a better job if we had somebody tackle it full-time.
So since there seems to be a lot of interest in a community hub, I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, if the CAO might not take that under advisement and maybe contemplate what a way forward for us might be.
Bring back some options for council's consideration.
Yeah.
Mr. Cookett.
I definitely will do that. I'll prepare a report with various options and costings associated with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. All those in favor? That's carried. New business or inquiries specific to planning and development services? Seeing none, comments or questions regarding the business status reports? Seeing none, I'll turn the chair back to Mayor Redekop.
Thank you very much, Councillor Passero. That then takes us to infrastructure services, and Councillor Zanko, you're still the chair?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do not have any presentations or delegations this evening. So the first report is IS 06, 2018, Award of Request for Proposal for Consulting Services for the Fort Erie Wayfinding Study. Can I get a mover? Councillor McDermott? Are there any questions or comments regarding this report? Councillor McDermott?
Just a quick note. We're way behind on wayfinding. I think this goes back to the days when Councillor Annunziata was the councillor from Ward 1.
I was the mayor last time.
Maybe even before. I know that this is a big issue down in our ward for sure. and I would be happy to sit on that committee if Councilor Cho.
Excellent. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just about to nominate Councillor McDermott for that position until he piped in, so I would like to do that for him.
Are there any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That passes. Are there any items of new business? Councillor Nutt?
Thank you, Chair Zanko. I just have one question through yourself to Mr. Walsh, because Mr. Cook had stepped out. Do we have an update from the Ministry of Transportation as far as a timeline as to when they will install the new boundary sign for Fort Erie that was discussed, that they had agreed to this past summer?
Through you, Madam Chair, I do not have that timeline.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I was just wondering if they had sent any update. I know that they were in the process of developing the sign, but thank you.
Are there any other items of new business? Seeing none, that brings us to the business status report. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, I will pass the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Councillor Zanko. That takes us to Corporate and Community Services. Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Corporate and Community Services is now open. We have no presentations and delegations. The first report for discussion tonight is CAO-03-2018, review of the Economic Preparedness Study prepared by Deloitte on behalf of the Economic Development and Tourism Corporation. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Zanko, for moving that. Councillor Butler, thank you for seconding. Are there any comments or questions, Your Worship?
Yes, I can appreciate the difficulty that the staff would have recommending resources be committed to projects that haven't quite yet gotten to the point where it's apparent that they're going to be proceeding. The purpose of this particular study was to identify the potential opportunities for the town, the impediments to our ability to capture those opportunities, and consider what types of things we could do in order to capture those opportunities. So I had some thoughts about this, and I came up with several. One of them being, having regard to some of the comments in the report, there could have been a recommendation that council consider whether we should be requesting changes to the Economic Development and Tourism Corporation's business plan. So there were some items that were identified: focus on skills training. Maybe they could participate in facilitating something there. Look at the waterfront tourism and how opportunities there could be captured, and what the potential might be for that. The second thing I thought of was maybe greater external communications of what Fort Erie offers in order to raise the profile of the community, maybe to attract some of the skilled workers that might be available. Thirdly, I thought we could determine what human resources would be required, if any, if one or more of these projects proceeded, and what those financial implications could mean. So that I suspect that there's been some consideration of that, but I think every step that we take down that road gets us closer to being ready when the opportunity arises, rather than then having to start at step one if we go to step 2 or 3. And the other one is this conundrum with respect to these two major projects, Canadian Motor Speedway and the Marina, both of which are in the same vicinity in terms of the infrastructure that they would require, primarily sewer, to proceed. And so while it's difficult to develop a strategy, I think we could be, I think a recommendation could be that we should have make some preliminary considerations of what the strategy would be going forward, and we could then maybe look at what potential funding opportunities may exist at either the federal or provincial level. So I want to be critical of the report. I'm just thinking that some recommendations would have been helpful, because I think that there are some things that we can do while we're waiting for these opportunities to arise. And that, I think, was the purpose of the report study.
Mr. Cookett?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Yeah, a couple brief comments. The reason for the report was I was requested to evaluate the Deloitte study, and that's what I think I have done here in this report. As far as moving forward, there are some things we can do, but I think personally it's premature at this point. These projects may or may not go, and if they do go, and we do need things like skill sets and so forth, we're out probably 3, 4, or 5 years. As far as servicing to the sites, it's no secret there's water mains available in those areas. We did a study on sanitary sewer and came up with some options on how to service them as far as a sanitary sewer. What you must keep in mind is there's various options depending on what projects move forward and if they do or do not. For instance, if only the marina project was to go ahead, then the option that was suggested in our study would not be the preferred. The preferred option would be to do a sanitary force main down the parkway. That is not at this present point the preferred option in the report. If we move forward with that, we're looking at a sewer which we could cost share, and it would be sized accordingly for all 3 projects, and it would run down an unopened road allowance. I think we're too early to advance that and do any further work, with all due respect.
Thank you, Mr. Cookett. Your worship?
So just in response, I appreciate that. We did ask the CAO to review the study. But the reality is we've got a piece of property on Queen Elizabeth Highway, which Canadian Motor Speedway may or may not become the location for. And if it doesn't, we've had an industrial land study done, which has indicated that we need more industrial land, so that I would see this as a potential prime site, so that one way or the other, we're not going to be losing out if we figure out way to service that particular area. Now, granted, we could be servicing it from Garrison Road North. I don't know that, and that may depend on whether the marina goes ahead or not. But I think there's traction. There's starting to be traction now, as the CAO knows, with respect to that. So that I just think that maybe I'm more anxious, maybe I'm overly anxious, but I think we need to be mindful of the fact that these opportunities will arise. And one of the things the Deloitte study did say is that if we lose some of these opportunities, we're likely not going to get them back. And that's something that I think we need to be vigilant about. I have the greatest respect for the CAO, and I hope I didn't say anything that offended him, because it wasn't my intention. Usually if I say anything of that nature, he throws something at me, and he didn't, so that's good news.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Passero?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share similar concerns that we would, at the present time, we are not handled or capable. We're not capable of handling the type of influx, as noted in the report, that 1, 2, or if we're fortunate enough, all 3 would provide. You go to most restaurants, Fort Erie or within Niagara, with a party of any more than 8 people, and waitresses and servers and bartenders don't know what to do. And that's the current climate that we're in. We've been too sleepy for too long, and it's about time that the dams are going to burst open, and I'm fully in favor of that. But as the mayor pointed out, many of us make annual pilgrimages to different places around the world. And usually the first time you go somewhere with great service and you enjoy the meal or enjoy the accommodations, generally you go back time and time again. Maybe some different things you do, but generally you gravitate to that place that welcomed you and served you best the first time. And if we're not able to capitalize this on the first time that people are here, we need only look up the Parkway or up the QEW to find maybe a couple other restaurants or hotels or places of lodging that might be able to accommodate them. I'm under no false pretense that we'll be able to handle everything here in Fort Erie. Niagara Falls is one of the wonders of the world. People are going to be coming here for that, but I think we need to give some serious thought as to positioning ourselves now as the cleaner, quieter, more cost-effective place to stay. Go to Niagara Falls for an afternoon, see the falls, we encourage it, but come back and stay, eat here in Fort Erie. And I don't think that's something that we've been spending enough time on, and something that we do need to speed up. I recognize to the CAO's point that it's a matter of timelines and when we see the trigger of something actually going to happen. To me, that's very precarious. I understand the points. I don't know if we will necessarily be the first ones to know as far as CMS goes when it's actually going to happen. We've had difficulty so far getting information in timely manners. We know that they are protective of what they're doing, and I appreciate that. It's a private project. They are under no obligation to us as a town or us as residents at all to let us know what they're doing. I fully respect that. But the moment that we see the green lights is about to happen, we need to seriously give some thought as to allocating some resources. If we don't have it internally, and the report is identifying in a lot of areas it is the EDTC that should be the lead role on this, then we need to look at allocating those resources. We can't always expect our agencies, boards, and committees to do more and more and more with the same amount of money that we give them. It just, at a certain point, you start to do less with less. And if we're serious about this, and the report speaks to it, then let's just have that cognitive attitude that we are going to commit ourselves to spending those resources. It's not going to happen on its own.
Thank you, Councillor Passero. Are there any other questions or comments from any other councillors? Okay, seeing none, I just had a couple comments about the report. And thank you very much, Mr. Cookett. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to analyze that. And one thing it's good to know from the EDTC perspective, for them to do the SWOT analysis is another thing for you to go back and do a peer evaluation, look at it from a town side and with the same SWOT analysis and tell us where our strengths and weaknesses are. One thing I will say about the study is that when we came to council, as a council, there was no solid plan. This study didn't exist. And I feel that we're doing right by the citizens of the community by getting information, preparing, know where we stand, because without the basic framework of a plan, and here we've started the basic framework of a plan, if you don't have that in place, you'll just be running around like a herd of chickens with our heads cut off, and we don't want to be in a position like that. We definitely wouldn't capture what we would be able to capture. So I think, you know, we're moving it in the right direction. To the mayor's point, there's probably is still more work to be done, but at least we've got a starting point that we didn't have at the beginning of our term, and at least we're doing right by the citizens that are hoping this comes to fruition, and for us to capture as much economic and development activity from this as possible that'll benefit all of the small business owners in town. So once again, I'd just like to thank Mr. Cookett and the EDTC for bringing these reports forward. So I'm going to call the question since there's no other comments or questions on this report. All those in favor? None opposed, that carries. Moving on to the next report, CAO-04 2018 Community Healthcare Services Committee Terms of References. Councillor McDermott, thank you for moving, seconded by His Worship. That report's on the floor. Comments or questions? Your Worship, and then Councillor McDermott.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple of comments with respect to paragraph 1.4 in the terms of reference. The second bullet, I'm going to go to the eighth bullet, which is the first one on the top of page 6 of the page 3 of that terms of reference. There's no reference in this to recruitment of physicians, and so there's a reference in this particular bullet to developing a retention initiative. But I think there should also be something that's clear about recruitment, because that has been a big part, and I know that there's been successes over the last little while. So I'd like to move to amend to include recruitment in that bullet. It would read developing a recruitment and retention initiative.
Certainly, Your Worship. Is there a seconder for his amendment? Councillor Butler seconds that.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
need a
we're still
second.
on council and committee? Okay, yeah, sorry, don't need a seconder, council and committee. Forgot this was a regular council night, I'm a little backwards. Okay, so all in favor of the mayor's amendment? Do you want to speak to it, Councillor McDermott? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? That carries. The report as amended.
Can I have one other suggestion.
Certainly, Your
There's
Worship.
section 2.7 talks about the frequency of the meetings, and so minimum of once a month or at the call of the chair. We have a similar provision in the Transportation Advisory Committee, and I would like that to be amended to include or by a majority or two-thirds majority of the committee as well, so that if there's some difficulty. So I would move to amend it to read, the CHCS committee will meet a minimum of once a month or at the call of the chair or by a call of a two-thirds majority of the committee.
Okay, adding that amendment. Councillor McDermott, do you want to speak to that? Okay, council and committee, we don't need the second. We're okay. Are there any comments or questions on that amendment? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Passero.
Just a question through you to the clerk. So if the language is in there as such, it would be the same as, it's understood that it would be the same premise as when council can poll and to the clerk, and if we get a majority, it doesn't have to be further explained that it has to be sent into the clerk or anything like that. It's just understood.
Madam Clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Two-thirds majority? Okay. All those in favor of the mayor's amendment? None opposed, that carries. The report as amended. Are you done, Your Worship, or are there future amendments? Okay. The chair will recognize Councillor McDermott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that I'm very happy to finally see this in front of me by the end of this term. That's great. I think we're probably a little behind by it, but I'm very happy to see that it's coming to a head and we can start working on the rules and regulations and all the stuff that goes with building a new UCC.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Are there any other comments or questions on the report as amended? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, that carries. Moving on to the next report, which is CAO-05/LC-01 2018. This is the Land Committee meeting minutes, moved by Councillor McDermott, seconded by Councillor Passero. That report is on the floor for comment or question. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, that carries. Moving on to the last report, FES-01-2018, construction of new fire station in the Ridgeway and Crystal Beach area, amalgamating two existing fire stations into one new station. That report, can I get a mover? Councillor Zanko, seconded by Councillor Butler. That report is on the floor for comment or question. Fire station, yes, Your Worship.
Oh, yes, yes. That was a clever ruse by the CAO to distract me. I'm suggesting that what we're actually doing here is, in order to give the staff an indication of what our level of support for this is that we're really giving them support in principle. And I'm suggesting that we amend the first two resolutions to state precisely that, council supports in principle. Because there are a few things that we would need to know going down the road. And that gets me to the third, to amendment of the third paragraph, and that is, aside from investigating alternative locations, I think it would be helpful if staff also developed a funding strategy so that we'll know how we're going to finance this should this continue to proceed further. The report does make reference to a couple of factors which relate to efficiencies within the equipment envelope that's allocated to the fire department as a whole. And we know that there would be 2 buildings that could be sold. So I would move that numbers 1 and 2 be council supports in principle, and that 3 add at the end, and a funding strategy.
Okay, that amendment is on the floor. Are there comments or questions? Councillor McDermott, can I pass you the chair because I actually want to speak to this?
Councillor Nutt?
Yes, thank you. So, I don't know how to say this politely, Your Worship, but respectfully, I disagree with doing it in principle. I think that right now, with the announcements of the funding coming out of the federal government, the fact that the fire stations are extremely old and would take hundreds of thousands of dollars just to bring up to code, I think we have to move forward with this and giving the staff the commitment and just moving forward with it in general. I think will ensure that this gets done. A matter of timing, I don't think it'll be done in the next 6 months. This is something that's going to take probably more than a year to develop, and I think it's necessary for the community, especially with the growth that's planned in the Ridgeway, with 6 Mile Creek at the Oaks coming online in the near future. Ridgeway Shores Phase 3 was built out. There's a lot more houses there. There's a lot greater need. The fact that we have 2 failing fire stations, I understand that, you know, we just spent a lot of money on Central Fire Station not too long ago. Seeing how that's now working in our favor, I just think that we need to really commit to this, not so much in principle, because I think that leaves it open for debate and question when the next council comes in, and there could be a change of direction or just a flat refusal to deliver the proper amount of services or the proper level of service to the community, and especially with the anticipated growth that we're going to see in that area.
Councilor Pissarro?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Procedurally, can we separate out Mayor Redekop's two amendments? Because I do support Councillor Nutt in his thought process, but I very much support Mayor Redekop and his amendment as far as the funding strategy. So could we separate that out?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can do that.
So if I could, then I'm going to assume, Mr. Chair, we'll start with the first
Carry on.
amendment then? Okay.
Yep.
I do agree with Councillor Nutt. I think at the end of the day, you know, council always has the ability to decline. We always have that ability until the shovel goes into the ground. But I think by adding in principle, I know what Mayor Redekop's trying to do. It's not tying us to everything, but I think if we can put in the notion about the funding strategy, and we have a number of options available to us along the way to say no, but I went through this with Central Station. It was a very, very tough sell between 1 and 2. We learned a lot of things. We made a lot of mistakes. I think those mistakes are just now starting to be corrected. In talking with some of the people who phoned me, there seems to be tremendous buy-in to do this. I'd hate to throw in principle and leave it kind of in the lurch when it gets back to the men and women of the fire department to say, well, council's kind of lukewarm, they're going to see how it plays out. So I'm not in support of that amendment for that reason, but very much in support, and out of turn, I'm in support of the other amendment. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Your Worship.
So I wonder if I could just ask the CAO what the intent was. Was it to move this forward in principle, or was it to get council to make its commitment?
Mr. Cookett?
Through you, Chair, to the mayor. Now you're putting me on the spot. It was to seek direction from council if we are to move forward with amalgamating these or not. If council had no appetite on merging these two, then we would find out tonight, and we would drop the issue and look at putting capital investments in those two existing stations. So the thought was bring this forward at a preliminary stage, get some feedback. So to answer your question, I believe if it was supported in principle, that gives us enough to move forward. We will bring back a funding strategy with a report, and at that time, council can support it or not.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Zanko?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that I would actually have a hard time supporting this without a funding strategy at this point. So although I do agree with my colleagues, I would support Mayor Redekop's amendment because I don't know how we could give this the full green light without a funding strategy.
Well, now you've done it. Can I pass the chair over to Councillor Butler because I have to say a few things.
Thank you. Councillor McDermott.
No matter how we look at this, we're going to have a new fire hall. I mean, we know this. And I don't think in the report that it really commits us to anything aside from doing what we should be doing, and that is supporting our firefighters and letting them know that this council realizes that they're going to need a new home soon because they're going to merge. It's pretty simple stuff, really. The financials are going to come along the way, and we're going to have each and every step of this is going to be dealt with by us or by the next council. So to me, this isn't really a big deal. We're not committed to anything really except one thing, to support the fact that we need another fire hall and we're going to have to build one. So the way I look at it is I understand this, support the firefighters and everything that they do, and I support this motion here.
Well, that brings us back to the motion. Are we going to then one separately? So we're going to deal with your first motion to amend. And that was in principle only. So all those in favor? That carries. Sorry, it does not carry. It does not. All those against? That carries. So that has been defeated. And we'll deal with the next motion. And that second motion. Have your hand up to speak to that? No? I'm sorry. But to go with paragraph 2 in principle as well. All those in favor? All those opposed? That is defeated. I'll return the chair back to you. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Third paragraph. How many are there? Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Chair Butler. Just a quick comment. I agree wholeheartedly with the mayor that we need to have a funding strategy, and I'll be supporting his amendment here at this point. I think that, you know, it is a foregone conclusion that we need a new fire hall and that we should commit to it and move forward. But I do and can appreciate the fact that we need to have a strategy, and a funding strategy is an important part of that strategy, and it should be in place before another report comes back to council, and you know, we can have some wholesome debate around that and some further dialogue. But so I will be supporting the mayor's amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Nutt. Would anyone else like to speak to that? Councillor Passero?
Yeah, I'm fully in support as well, and I think it's important to note for anybody out there, it's that, you know, asking for a funding strategy is not questioning our commitment to building the station at some point. It's just where are we going to draw the funds from? So there's a big difference between are we going to spend the money versus where are we going to allocate the funds, whether it's debt financing, reserves, what have you. So when I look at funding strategy, that's what I'm looking at is where's the money going to come from, not necessarily are we willing to spend the money. I'm committed to spending the money.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors? Okay. Seeing that no one else would like to speak to it, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion carries. I'll turn that chair back to you. One more.
It's amended. You have to, no.
Okay, thank you. See what happens when we change chairs here 3 times. Okay, so then I'm going to call the question for the report as amended. All those in favor? That motion carries. Would anybody like to speak to that report as it's amended?
We voted on
We're
it.
done.
I
Okay.
just would like the chair back.
You're more than welcome to have.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Now that we're done with all the reports on the business of tonight, we'll move on to 5.3, the new business. Are there any items of new business anyone wants to bring forward? Councillor Passero?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to our clerk, is there any way in the preparation of our agendas that somehow we can have a page number on every page? I found it quite difficult when we got to Mr. Brady's referencing the appendixes tonight that when we're dealing in reports that are 50 and 60 pages, to try and scroll through to find an appendix is quite difficult, and each page doesn't necessarily have a page number associated with it. It may say page 2 of 3, appendix 1, but for the purpose of our report and trying to bring it up on the iPad, it doesn't actually have a page number to search it by. Is
Madam Clerk?
that something we could look at?
I will look into that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other items of new business? Seeing none, we'll move on to the business status report. Are there any comments or questions on the business status report? Yes, Your Worship?
What if we could defer that report that's supposed to be coming forward on the 26th of February relative to the newspapers and driveways? Just kidding.
So, I think that's the mayor getting back at me because this weekend I was out snow blowing and my neighbor had surgery. So being the nice guy that I am, I went over to clear his driveway, and sure enough, my snowblower ate the paper and suffered some serious damage. So I really do not want to see that report delayed, but the newspaper has some splaining to do. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I will close corporate and community services and pass the chair back to His Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nutt. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Are there any meetings that are scheduled this week? There is an open house for the Parks and Master Plans on Thursday evening, starting at 6 o'clock, and I announced that earlier on. Councillor Nutt?
Yes, Your Worship. There is the Transportation Steering Committee meeting at the region tomorrow for
Yep.
you, myself, and Councillor Nunziata.
Right, and that's at 2:30 in view of the lunch tomorrow for the South Niagara mayors.
Correct.
And that's at the region. Any other meetings? Councillor Passero.
Thank you, Mayor DeComp. The Standing Committee for Museum, Cultural, and Heritage is meeting here at Town Hall tomorrow, conference room number 3, 10 a.m.
Any other meetings? Then Councillor Nutt, would you like to move that we adjourn?
Yes, Your Worship. The Town of Fort Erie Council and Committee meeting hereby adjourns at 7:43 p.m.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. So I think what we should do is just take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll come back and we'll start in with the regular council meeting. I'd like to call this regular council meeting to order. Would you all rise, please, for the invocation?
We meet to serve our community and endeavor to be worthy custodians of all that has been entrusted to us. Let us be concerned only for what will promote good government. May we bring to our council chamber minds that think and hearts that feel, so that in our deliberations we may display imagination, wisdom, and courage, and the will to do our work for the good of all.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The roll call, please.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councillor Luberts.
Thank you. We have an addendum this evening. It's a piece of correspondence from the Kinsman Club with respect to Kinsman and Connect Day, and we will have a resolution under it'll be item F under section 9.2.2 of our agenda. I do have one announcement, and that's with respect to a notification by the town from the Association of Ontario Road Supervisors that they have certified Nicholas Chevalier, who works in our engineering department, with the Associate Road Supervisor certification. And they congratulate him on that and ask that we make this certification made known publicly. The Association of Ontario Road Supervisors has been serving public works professionals since 1961. In 1996, they were granted by the provincial government the exclusive right to use the designation Certified Road Supervisor, and there are 4 levels of that certification, one of which is Associate, which is what Nick Chevalier has been certified as. This is an important certification because it increases corporate professionalism, accountability, and morale. And so on behalf of the council, I'd like to congratulate Nicholas Chevalier for certification as an Associate Road Supervisor by the Association of Ontario Road Supervisors. That then takes us to disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Passero.
Thank you, Your Worship. Under consideration of bylaws 22-2018, when we adopt the general capital budget and general levy, I'll declare a conflict as far as the allocation we are proposing for the Lions Douglas Heights Senior Center. I'm the current president of the Fort Erie Lions, and our club does maintain a majority of that board of directors.
Okay, and I presume also then 9.2.1C, where we're approving the minutes of the council in budget meeting of January the 24th, where the same item was dealt with?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll ask for that to be dealt with separately.
Thank you, Your Worship.
And removed from the consent agenda items. Are there any other disclosures? I have a similar, I have the same items, bylaw 22-2018 and item 9.2.1C with respect to the council and or committee and budget meeting as it relates to allocation of funding to the Crystal Ridge Community Center. So we'll deal with those separately when we get to them. If there are no other disclosures of pecuniary interest, notice of upcoming public meetings. There is the Fort Erie Parks and Open Space Master Plan meeting this Thursday, February 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Leisureplex Banquet Hall. And on February the 20th, Tuesday, which is the regular council a committee meeting that evening, zoning bylaw amendment for 672 Edgemere Road in the chambers here. The information report with respect to that zoning bylaw amendment will be available on February 14th, 2018 on our website. That takes us to the regional councilors report. Good evening, Councillor Annunziata.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, staff, Leah, thank you for sticking around. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I'm going to be talking about things that are coming up with respect to some of our committee meetings and some of the things that have just occurred with respect to regional council. So the first item on my agenda, and I know Councillor Butler is going to be thrilled about this, and the region undertook a very comprehensive employment inventory. And the results of those came to council last week. And it is the most comprehensive study that the region has ever undertaken. Usually we use census data. So there's good news and bad news to that. The bad news is there's no comparables. You can't benchmark because this is starting year 1. but moving forward, we are accumulating an incredible amount of data. So the employment inventory will provide key opportunities for the region to personally connect with every one of the businesses that responded. So moving forward, that's good news as far as how we communicate and how our businesses communicate with us. Of specific note, I will, there was a question on the survey, and is there anything Niagara Region can do to help support your business? And again, the response themes are all articulated very well, and the report is available for any member of council that would like to get a copy of it. But I will highlight the #1 response was business exposure, interbusiness networking, regional funding or incentives, and business attraction. So basically better communication strategies. How do you bring more people in market in order to utilize their services? So I will say this though, when the survey was conducted, Bill 148 was not ratified yet. So I would imagine that somewhere that should have been on everyone's mind as well as far as the increase in minimum wage. So I just wanted to make special mention of that. Moving forward, some good news with respect to the Rosehill Water Treatment Plant. So we just got an incredible clean bill of health with respect to the Rosehill Water Treatment Plant. It is operated in such a way that it met or exceeded the requirements of the Act, the regulation, the system's approval, or any order that may be issued for this reporting period. So people need to have confidence in their drinking water, and certainly the Rosehill Treatment Plant is doing its job, and it's doing it very, very well with respect to our regional facilities. Some other good news stories. The Seniors Service Quality Improvement Report came forward, and this is a really good news story because the Senior Service Long-Term Care Homes completed an accreditation survey with Accreditation Canada on November 19th to the 22nd, 2017. Now, Accreditation Canada is an independent, non-for-profit organization that sets standards for quality and safety in healthcare. So first, 4 surveyors from across Canada met with residents, families, staff, and community partners and reviewed systems, policies, and documentation to measure adherence to 100 standards and 457 areas of concern. So it's a very comprehensive report that they put together. The 8 Niagara Region homes successfully met 98.1% of accreditation program requirements. Senior Services was awarded a full accreditation with commendation. So congratulations to the wonderful staff that we have at the region with respect to our long-term care homes. Just wanted to make special mention of that as well. This is important, and with respect to Fort Erie. 2018 Journey Together funding. So the provincial government is investing a total of $150 million over 3 years to support the implementation across Ontario of the Ministry of Education Early Years Initiation under the Journey Together, Ontario's Commitment to Reconciliation with Indigenous Peoples. So Niagara Region's Children's Services work closely with both the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center and the Niagara Regional Native Center to support each organization's funding proposal. Both proposals received provincial approval, and now Niagara will receive $2 million of new funding to support the expansion of culturally relevant and Indigenous-led licensed childcare and child and family centers. So wonderful news that the region has acquired that funding, and it's great news for Fort Erie as well. Niagara EMS Health Transfer Care Improvement Strategy. So in 2017, Niagara EMS experienced the highest level of lost ambulance time to hospital transfer of care of 15,438 hours. So we met with our Niagara Health System partners and said, what can we do better? Can we put together a strategy and implement something to improve transfer of care performance and offloads in 2018? I'm happy to report that that process is moving forward. So we have incredible buy-in from Niagara Health. Our regional EMS are working hand in hand in order to implement a strategy that hopefully can reduce those offloading times and save the use of those ambulances that are tied up in offloading scenarios instead of putting them back where they belong. Okay. Of specific importance to our planning staff, the new official plan update. So the purpose of the report coming forward is to provide an update with respect to the new regional official plan process, specifically with respect to the 8 priority background studies previously outlined to the Planning and Development Committee. Now, those 8 priorities, natural environment and agriculture, climate change, aggregates, growth management related background studies, regional land needs assessment, regional urban structure, regional employment land strategy, regional housing strategy. Now, moving forward, there's a preparation of background studies that will be taking place. There is also a planning advisory committee that is being struck. Now, presently, we had 86 applications come forward to sit on the planning advisory committee. We will be choosing anywhere between 10 to 12. Now, moving forward, the whole idea is to engage your area planners. They will be making presentations, consultation with the public, our planning advisory committee, presentations to local councils to highlight approaches and invite involvement, and that's coming in March or April. So again, the regional official plan, we're inviting stakeholders to come forward and see how we plan Niagara's future to 2041. Niagara investment in culture. So I wanted to highlight to council the results of the NIC program. So the NIC program for 2016-17, it leveraged $1.9 million in cash and in kind total funding against a regional investment of $292,000. So the funding projects took place in 11 of 12 local municipalities. The program was supported, has supported the hiring of agricultural workers on both full-time and part-time basis. Of specific interest to Fort Erie was Fort Erie Festivals, who were successful in the NIC program. The next round of applications have come forward. They will be going through an adjudication process, and $250,000 will be budgeted towards the NIC program. Just to give you a specific example of an oversubscribed program. So right now, applications are underway. The current NIC program received over 30 applications with 2018 funding requests of $480,000 on a budget of $250,000. So it's a very oversubscribed program. Council fought very hard to keep it in its budget, and I'm very happy to say that. And that's a perfect segue to congratulating two of Fort Erie's locals, Maddie Matheson. I hope everyone caught Maddie on the Tonight Show with Seth Meyers. Maddie was born and raised here in Fort Erie, and he's become somewhat of a chef phenom right now. So congratulations to Maddie and all the success he's having. And specifically, DJ Shub, Dan General, for his Juno nomination. So again, culture is alive and well in the town of Fort Erie. So fantastic initiatives for both those individuals. Specifically to, and I know we've had communication on this issue before, regional incentive reviews and community improvement plans. So I want to be very, very clear. Staff have come forward with a memo to advise council that staff will not be bringing forward requests to partner on new or updated community improvement plans until we've done that updating of the incentive review process. So that's going to be coming up in 2018. But that's not to say that the region is not participating in all existing CIP incentive programs. They will continue in 2018 as directed by council. So this postponement in no way affects regional participation in existing CIP programs on which the region partnered with in 2017. They will continue. This postponement also does not affect regional participation in regional development charge reduction programs. Those will continue. So again, the region is overseeing the process of seeing where the value is with respect to the CIPs and regional incentive programs. That's going to be coming forward in a review. So no new requests or updated community plans are being accepted right now until that review is done. But it does not affect the existing ones that, that we still partner with at the town of Fort Erie. That is my update, and I will turn it back to your worship for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Annunziata. Any questions, Councillor Nutt?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple questions based on the information provided by the regional councillor. The regional housing strategy, will there be framework set out in there that will address homelessness and people living below the poverty line? What will be that strategy, or will that be part of the framework? Thank you, Councillor Nunziata, if I may, Your Worship.
Yes, you may.
That's an important issue that you raise, especially the waiting list, because at least 30% of those people reside in Fort Erie that are waiting to get on there. I know that we have an excess of 3,000 people, roughly, give or take, on that waiting list, and we're in dire need of multi-unit dwellings here in the community to service those people. My next question was in regards to the M-Terra situation, particularly on the corner of West Main and Stevensville Road. The garbage can continually does not get emptied. I have to keep calling it in, and I know that because I walk my dog past there every day. So it was full last Tuesday. It's still full today. In fact, it's overflowing, and I know there are businesses on that corner, and it's somewhat of a detractor to see an overflowing trash can in that area. Mr. Walsh has been very good about getting the town to go out and clean it up at times that I've called and expressed it, but after speaking with Carla Stout, I've just been calling it in to the region because I think it's an issue that needs to be brought to your attention, considering that the contract for the service is with the region, and I don't know that I'm sure that you're hearing that from her, but it always helps to hear it from residents.
So it's the first time I've heard of that, but absolutely, by all means, pass them on to me. We have an incredible staff with respect to waste management, and they're very, very responsible and very receptive to any challenges that we have in the town of Fort Erie. I know we met down in the Bridgeburg area because they were having some of the same concerns, and the commitment made is to make sure that waste receptacles are emptied. So I'll pass that on, Councillor, and we'll try to get that rectified for you.
Your Worship, if I may continue.
You may.
Thank you. In regards to the CIP, I have basically two questions and a concern I want to raise with you. First off, in Stevensville, we have a commercial district. We have sidewalks up to the railroad tracks on Stevensville Road, but the commercial district extends beyond that part being the regional road. Do you know if there is a timeline to install sidewalks to service those commercial businesses? There are several people that walk on the shoulder of the road, and my fear is that during the winter, the shoulder's not exposed, so they're actually walking very close to traffic, which, as the mayor's illustrated jokingly several times, he doesn't obey the speed limit in that area. It's a 50, so you don't want to...
I didn't say that. I'm confident I didn't say that.
No, I'm just teasing the mayor, but that is a 50, but often people are not traveling 50 in that zone. Although the police have been very diligent in policing that area, which we're thankful for. But we really could use sidewalks to service those commercial areas, especially with the new Minor Brothers building, the Tim Hortons there, the subway, all your conveyances that people are going to are right there, not serviced by sidewalks. My two questions in regards to the CIP review is, how long is that review going to take? Is that going to take a full year? And the second question is, what's going to happen to all the applications or applicants that come forward in the void of you guys doing the review? Will they be, is this just hey, we're going to put it on hold for now, but anybody who brings forward their application between now and until we get the review done, are they going to be allowed to resubmit to the region once this is opened back up? Like, are they going to be grandfathered in, or are they just going in a black hole, and should they wait? Like, really, what should we tell the businesses?
So I'm gonna try to clear it up again. Any CIP that's currently existing is status quo. So if there are other applicants that the town has with respect to the secondary plans and the CIPs that have been established in the town of Fort Erie, with respect to Bridgeburg, Stevensville, Ridgeway, those are established CIP areas. They can still apply, as they always have. What the region is saying is there will be no new consideration. So I know, for example, South End Secondary Plan is due to come online very shortly. Once that's passed on to the region for an official plan amendment and adoption, that falls into that category that you speak of, where once the review is completed, then it can consider some of the applicants coming forward from that secondary plan and that CIP program. So there's no black hole. if you live in Stevensville, or a business owner in Stevensville, or you're a business owner in Bridgeburg, or a business owner in Ridgeway, and you want to submit an application through the CIP program to the town of Fort Erie, the matching funding is still there. The program is still there for all those funds. This is for new incentive programs that are coming forward. For example, the South End Secondary Plan. So I hope that's
Councillor
clear.
Nutt, is that clear?
Well, that's clear, but exactly that. I'm talking to business owners in the South End, and they want to know, do they wait until the review's done before they submit their applications?
So I'm going to assume that once this council ratifies that secondary plan and the region ratifies that official plan amendment, at that particular point in time, there's a CIP plan that has to be established and ratified by this council. I'm going to venture to say that that review will probably be done and completed and the results back to regional council by Q2 or Q3. And we can have a look at the CIPs if there's more money that has to be invested in it, but that would probably be the time. So I don't anticipate applications for that secondary plan or any eligible CIPs to be moved forward by Fort Erie within the next time frame before that review is completed anyways. So I really don't think it impacts that entirely right now. But I will get some definitive timelines for you as far as when that review comes forward, but I've been told Q2 or Q3.
Perfect. Yeah, I didn't want that to be lost on the audience that you did answer the question, that it would be like look to Q3, because if you look at it realistically right now, we're exactly almost halfway, with the exception of a couple days through Q1, halfway through Q1. So that's not an extensive amount of time. My fear was that it was going to drag out for 12 months, but
No, and I understand that this council, has other plans in the works as well. So as you move forward with other secondary plans, I understand Crystal Beach has a secondary plan that's, I don't know if it's about to be started or it will be undertaken very shortly or in this year. But as that one comes online, again, there's an opportunity for CIPs and community incentives as well.
Thank you. So there is one thing to clarify. So what was the significance of your comments about the incentive review? No new CIPs until review completed?
Correct.
So the South End Secondary Plan, once it's approved by us and by the region, has to wait until the review is completed?
Correct. So
which will be Q2 or 3?
Correct.
Okay,
so,
got it.
So status quo.
Got it.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Councillor Passero.
Thank you. And that's Q2 or Q3 of this year?
Right.
Of this year,
Okay.
correct.
Yeah, I didn't hear that reference. So, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Nunziata, I'm going to send you some correspondence I received from a resident on Queen Street, and they have some concerns down there regarding some of the traffic patterns for the intersection itself. And in some site visits, it's been noted that it seems that that intersection where you have the terminus of Queen Central, also the on and off ramp to the QEW, seems to be over-engineered going back to when that served as the on-ramp to the QEW through where the PBA building is now. So I'll forward this to you. They have some concerns, potentially some suggestions as how we could do some traffic calming in and around that intersection, but given that it's a regional right-of-way and also some MTO restrictions, I'm sure, with that off-ramp, I think it'd be best in your inbox. So maybe we can correspond over that. I'll send it later tonight.
Absolutely. Send that forward and we'll see what it's all about and see if we can get some traction on it. And again, I encourage any member of council, if you have concerns with respect to regional roads, potholes, by all means bring them forward. I've been getting a few calls as it is right now with respect to the Dominion Road reconstruction and heavy machinery and heavy trucks using town roads. And unfortunately, making those less than desirable. But there's a traffic plan in place. I encourage all residents, if you do encounter heavy equipment where they shouldn't be, or potholes, by all means, get a hold of your regional councillor, or you can go online and make sure you put that request through, that those potholes are taken care of.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other councillors? Thank you very much, Councillor Nunziata. Appreciate the update. That then takes us to the presentations and delegations, and we've had Ms. Dolch patiently waiting by to inform us of planning, building, how-to application videos. Good evening again. This is a different meeting, so.
Pillar of prosperous and growing community, authorize planning staff to proceed with explainer how-to videos to provide information to the general public on what is needed for certain types of building and planning applications, and to explain the process for each type of application. The video topics were chosen based on applications which are normally submitted by the general public without the assistance of planning or building professionals. There were 10 pictorial videos were prepared, and they include the building permit process, deck permits, shed permits, pool permits, house addition, what is a minor variance, what is a severance, the minor variance process, the severance process, and what is a deeming bylaw. Now I'm just going to show you a couple examples of the videos. There are obviously all 10 videos, and they'll be available through our communication strategy, which I'll explain shortly. This is the building permit process video.
Generally, you need a building permit for structures that are 10 square meters or more in area or have plumbing. If you're building a pool with a depth of 60 centimeters or more, or doing interior renovations including finished basements, and also for certain types of raised decks and patios. There are different requirements for each type of project, and town staff can help explain those to you. The permit process has 4 major stages: counter-inquiry, permit application, processing of the application, and inspections. It all begins with counter-inquiry. This is where you go to Town Hall to discuss the project with staff. They will answer your questions and give you an overview of the permit requirements, including outside agency involvement, all applicable fees and deposits, and timelines for the whole process. Staff will also advise you of what kinds of drawings you need, which drawings you can create, and which ones an architect or engineer needs to do. You will also be given an application checklist that summarizes what is required for the application and to help with putting your materials together. Then it's time for the permit application phase. This is where the drawings and additional information for your project are submitted to the town. The first thing staff will do is determine if all the right information is included in your application. This makes sure that they have what they need to accurately check all the legal requirements for that kind of project. They will also calculate the permit application fees that you discussed during the counter-inquiry phase. These are generally based on the area or size of your building, or a flat rate based on the type of project. These fees pay for the staff time it takes to review and do inspections. After your application is complete, submitted, and the fees have been paid, staff begins processing of the application. This is the detailed technical review, when all the various regulations are checked, including those of outside agencies. Those agencies might have regulations to deal with traffic or floodplain issues, for example. The review of your application package takes between 10 and 30 days, depending on the type of project. The last phase begins when your application is approved for building. On-site inspections are conducted on a specific schedule once you start construction. Inspectors come to the site and identify issues and ensure that the construction is being done according to the approved design drawings and regulations. Once construction is complete and all the required inspections and regulations have been met, you have completed the building permit process. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, contact town staff. They'll be happy to assist you.
So that was an example of the building permit process video, and I've shown one example of each. I'm going to show you now the planning video, and it's on a minor variance process. I'm just showing you one of each because they are quite long. They will be available on our YouTube channel for other people, members of the public to watch.
This video gives an overview of the process and timeframes for a minor variance. Step 1. Review your concept with planning department staff. They will be able to determine if your plan meets the zoning requirements for your property. They'll also be able to assist in identifying variances or required changes that you may have missed. At this time, staff will also advise whether or not they can support your application, advise of any changes they would like to see, and if the application cannot be considered minor, and discuss the zoning process that may be needed. Staff will also advise you if you need to contact additional agencies to discuss your proposal. Step 2. Once you have all the material required in the application form, you're ready to submit. Generally, this includes a completed minor variance application form, a scaled drawing showing the property, setbacks, coverages, and proposed use, and town application fee and other agency fees if applicable. Step 3. This is the processing of the minor variance application. This takes a maximum of 45 days from the time of complete application to a decision by the Committee of Adjustment. Generally, the process is as follows. A notice of the hearing and application details is circulated to agencies and the neighbors within 60 meters of the property, and this is done at least 14 days prior to the hearing by town staff. You will be contacted by staff to pick up a sign to be posted on the property for 14 days prior to the hearing. Before attending the hearing, you will be informed of comments received and any requested conditions. You or a representative will be required to attend the Committee of Adjustment hearing. And at the hearing, you and other members of the public will have the opportunity to speak. At the hearing, the committee will review the information and take into account comments from staff and other agencies, as well as input from the public. At the hearing, the committee may approve or refuse the application with or without conditions, or defer the decision until a future hearing if more information is required. Their determination will be based on whether they feel the variance meets the 4 tests defined in the Planning Act. The decisions of the committee are circulated to agencies and others who may have requested to be informed. All decisions are subject to a 20-day appeal period, where appeals to the Ontario Municipal Board can be made by the applicant, agencies, neighbors, or other members of the public regarding the committee's decision. If there are no appeals and all conditions have been met, then the decision of the Committee of Adjustment is final. Once you have a final decision, you have permission to proceed with the building permit process. If you have questions, please contact the town planning staff. They would be happy to assist you. Thanks for watching.
So our communication strategy to get these videos out to the public and make the public aware of these videos is to play the videos on the Planning and Development Services TV, which is located on the 2nd floor. To update content in the community guide to include promotion of new videos, update the photo with an image from the video. To develop a media release to local media and publish it on the town blog and social media channels, as well through e-blasts and the February e-newsletter. Also to upload the videos on the town YouTube channel. To replace Let Us Take You for a Tour video with one of the new videos on the front page of the website. to add videos to the appropriate web pages on www.forterie.ca, which would include the web page for development approvals and building permits and inspections, and to promote videos on social media in the e-newsletter every March. In addition, staff are planning to post one notice in the local newspaper just to get the information out to those who use the newspaper for communication. Now that the videos are prepared, both the Coordinator of Community and Corporate Communications and planning staff will work together to get this strategy out within the next couple weeks. Planning and Development Service staff, with the help of the Coordinator of Corporate Communications, will monitor feedback and track the number of hits from the videos on the town's social media sites to see if the new videos are successful. Thank you, Your Worship. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dolch. Do any members of council have any questions? It's very informative, and I think it's quite helpful for the public to at least get some insights into how these processes work. Thank you very much. That then takes us to the consent agenda, and we know that item 9.2.1C needs to be separated from the, and dealt with separately. And Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was hoping to have 9.2.2B
Okay, we can
removed as well.
remove that. Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes any other reports, minutes, what have you? Okay, then Councillor McDermott, with those two items removed, you have the motion with respect to the consent agenda. Nine 9.2.1C and 9.2.2B. Right.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler, that council approves the consent agenda items as recommended, with the exception of 9.21C and 9.2.2D.
B. You said B?
B.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The consent agenda, minus those items, is on the floor for any questions or comments. If none, all those in favor of the resolution? None opposed, that is carried. So Councillor McDermott, I wonder if you could proceed with a little more precision with respect to 9.2.1C. I have a conflict with respect to part 2.5 of the minutes of the Council and Budget Committee meeting. So I wonder if you, and Councillor Passero has a conflict with part 5.1 of those same minutes. So I think we should deal with those separately. Since I can vote on the one that Councillor Passero has a conflict on, and he can vote on the one that I have a conflict on. So, I don't know, Councillor McDermott, do you have that? So it's 9.2.1C, part 2.5. That's correct, that's one. And the other one is 9.2.1C, part 5.1. So if you could deal with those separately, if you could move those, and if your seconder is willing to go along with that. So you'll deal with those separately then? Thank you. So I'm going to give the chair to deal with your movement of consent agenda item 9.2.1C, part 2.5.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor McDermott, if you could proceed with reading of the bylaw. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Can you please proceed with the motion for the bylaw for 9.2.1.C 2.5?
For the consent agenda item.
The consent agenda item.
Seconded by Councillor Butler. The council approved 9.2.1C, part 2.5 of the consent agenda as recommended.
Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, the mayor has a conflict, so he's going to abstain from the vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries. I'll pass the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nutt. So, Councillor McDermott, could you do the same thing then with 9.2.1C, Part 5.1 of the consent agenda, please?
Yes, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler. The council approves the consent agenda items with regards to 9.2.1C, Part 5.1.
Are there any questions or comments on that? All those in favor? That is carried. Then that gets us to item 9.2.2B, and Councillor Butler, you wanted to deal with that separately?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to move to amend the action from receive to support.
Okay. Madam Clerk, what do you need for that, other than a motion to change that action item from receive to support? You've got a mover and and you'll need a second. We obviously need a seconder.
I'll second it.
Councillor Nutt is prepared to second that. Are there any questions or comments with respect to that? Councillor Nutt?
Thank you, Your Worship. From having a family member who works in the hospital, I can appreciate the regional councillor saying that it's good news that additional beds were approved for the Welland Hospital, but as firsthand knowledge, those beds are already full, and we're already seeing again that people are stacking up, and I don't think the province has done enough in this area. So I'm glad that Councillor Butler has made this motion, and I think that we need, especially now, to keep the pressure on the province to open up even more beds, considering that the demographic of the Niagara region is predominantly baby boomer, which is moving into an age where those services are going to be essential over the next 15 years and in very, very high demand. Thank you.
Take it easy. Any other questions or comments? Councillor, all those in favor of the resolution? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Butler, on that. So we're through the consent agenda, and that then takes us to new business. New business inquiries. So the first resolution relates to the Ontario Good Roads Association Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, and Councillor Zanko, you have that.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Passero. Whereas a coalition of municipal engineer associations, MEA, and the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario have successfully applied to have a review of the municipal class environmental assessment process conducted under Part 4, Section 61 of the Environmental Bill of Rights Act, 1993. And whereas impact studies and public meetings required by the MCEA process often take 2 years or more to complete before construction can commence. And whereas the MCEA requirements to evaluate alternatives are often not well aligned prior or municipal land use planning decisions, and whereas an analysis by the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, RCCAO, has demonstrated that the time to complete an EA rose from 19 months to 26.7 months, and the cost went from an average $113,300 to $386,500. And whereas the Auditor General of Ontario has tabled recommendations for modernizing the MCEA process, and whereas in spite of the written commitment made by the Ministry of Environment between 2013 and 2015, no action has been taken. And whereas local projects that do not have the necessary approvals could lose out on the next intake of Building Canada funding. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council of Fort Erie requests that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change take immediate steps to expedite the response process for Part 2 orders or bump-up requests as part of the S61 review to improve the MCEA process times and reduce study costs, and further, that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change support changes to better integrate and harmonize the MCEA process and processes defined under the Planning Act, and further, that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change amend the scope of MCEA reports and studies to reduce duplication with existing public processes and decisions made under the municipal official plans and provincial legislation.
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Are there any questions or comments with respect to that resolution? All those in favor? None opposed. That is carried. That takes us to our next item of new business, which relates to strengthening quality and accountability for Patients Act. And Councillor Passero, you have that resolution.
Yes, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko. Whereas Bill 160, the Strengthening Quality and Accountability for Patients Act, amended the Ambulance Act to permit the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care to enable 2 pilot projects hosted by willing municipal governments to allow firefighters certified as paramedics to treat patients while on duty with a fire department. And whereas the Government of Ontario is committed to proceeding with the pilots and enabling the fire medic model, despite the absence of objective evidence to show that it would improve patient outcomes or response times, and whereas the current interest arbitration model, particularly in the fire services sector, allows arbitrators to impose awards on unwilling employers that directly impact the employer's ability to determine how it will deploy its workforce, as evidenced by the experience of many municipalities in regards to the 24-hour shift. And whereas in the absence of legislative protection, unwilling municipalities may be forced to enter into a pilot or adopt a fire medic model as a result of interest arbitration. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and its municipal members have called on the Government of Ontario to introduce legislative amendments to the Fire Protection and Prevention Act 1997 and the Ambulance Services Collective Bargaining Act to preclude arbitrators from expanding the scope of work for firefighters and paramedics respectively through interest arbitration awards. And whereas there is precedent for a restriction on the scope of jurisdiction of arbitrators in Section 126 of the Police Services Act, which precludes arbitrators from amending the core duties of police officers. And whereas the Government of Ontario has committed that no unwilling municipal government will have a fire medic pilot or program imposed upon them, now therefore be it resolved that the Corporation of the Town of Fort Erie calls on the Government of Ontario to act immediately so that legislative amendments that will protect unwilling municipalities from being forced by arbitrators to have a fire medic pilot or program are placed within the upcoming budget bill before the Ontario Legislature rises for the provincial election. And further, that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Premier Kathleen Wynne, Office of the Premier, Honourable Dr. Eric Hoskins, Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, Honourable Marie-France Lalonde, Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Honourable Kevin Flynn, Minister of Labour, Honourable Bill Morrow, Minister of Municipal Affairs, local MPPs, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor of the resolution? None opposed? That is carried. So, Councillor Zanko, you have the next resolution.
Yes, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott. The council accepts the resignation of Yvonne Hopkins from the Environmental Advisory Committee, and further, that council directs staff to proceed with filling the vacancy in accordance with the provisions of the procedural bylaw.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. Councillor Zanko, you have the next resolution as well.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that council accepts the resignation of Gary Shirk from the Environmental Advisory Committee, and further, that council directs staff to proceed with the filling of the vacancy in accordance with the provisions and the procedural bylaw.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on that? All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. So are there any other items of new business or inquiries? Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a new business or inquiry item. I just wanted to congratulate Larry Boggio, who's won the Jan R. Cook Community Contribution Award. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that they're a huge supporter of community living in Fort Erie, with Boggio and Edwards being located in Ridgeway. And I think it's appropriate that we take a moment to recognize that not only is he a great community contributor in Fort Erie, also in Port Colborne, and he's very deserving and has won this award. And I'd just like to congratulate him on behalf of Fort Erie Council.
Thank you. That's very, very appropriate. Any other items of new business? Then we'll move to Councillor Butler, who has a motion on our agenda this evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott. Whereas on May 24th, 2016, the Council of the Town of Fort Erie passed a motion to support Halliburton Kawartha Lakes Brock MPP Laurie Scott's motion for a multi-jurisdictional and coordinated task force of law enforcement agencies, Crown prosecutors, judges, victim services, and frontline agencies in Bill 158, Saving the Girl Next Door Act 2016, and whereas men, women, and children are targeted victims that are lured, manipulated, physically and verbally abused, coerced, and enslaved into the sex trade or forced labor, and whereas the International Labor Organization estimates that there are approximately 2.5 million victims worldwide, of which 98% is estimated to be female, and whereas it is one of the fastest growing crimes that starts and stays in Canada, targeting victims, 90% of which are Canadian born, averaging the age of 14, and whereas Ontario is a major hub of human trafficking in Canada, and whereas human trafficking is a real problem that exists in our neighborhoods and our communities within the Niagara region, and whereas there is a lack of understanding and awareness within our communities with respect to this existing problem, and whereas since people are trafficked from one community to another, there is a need to raise awareness through education and training for our teachers, first responders, police officers, hotel workers, and community members in each municipality throughout the region, so that it will make it more difficult for traffickers to operate and to hide themselves. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Council of the Town of Fort Erie contributes $5,000 with funding to be determined by the Chief Administrative Officer to be given to the YWCA Niagara Region Anti-Human Trafficking Division for the purpose of creating a training and awareness program that will assist community leaders, educational institutes, first responders, police officers, municipal officials, and the communities at large throughout the region. And further, that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to all municipalities within Niagara and the region of Niagara to adopt this motion and to also contribute $5,000 each to the YWCA Niagara region, with the express purpose of having Crystal Snyder, Program Manager of the Anti-Human Trafficking Protocol, develop and administer a training awareness program, and further, that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, the Honourable Kathleen Wynne, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Charles Sousa, Minister of Finance, the Honourable Rob Nicholson, MP, and Wayne Gates, MPP, for their support and financial assistance.
Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Butler?
I do. A few weeks ago, we listened to Crystal Snyder, and she was speaking with respect to the crisis here in Niagara, and on her desk alone, having 134 cases come across, and that's a small representation of the problem that's in the Niagara Peninsula. I ended up doing some research of my own and bought a book called Trafficked, and it was a detailed account of how insidious this human trafficking is, and it is the biggest violator of human rights. And I think that as leaders of a municipality, it's our purpose, and it should be our mission to at least make a first step to fighting this crime. It could be your brother, your sister, your child. That could be influenced by these perpetrators and brought into a circumstance that they had unwittingly ventured into. So I think education is key. I think that's the first step to solving this problem, and with your indulgence, I hope that all of Council will support this.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very thankful for Councillor Butler to bring this motion forward, and I'll be supporting it. I think that one item that we often take for granted and sometimes gets overlooked is that we are a border community, and that they could very easily be skirted away to a different country altogether, which makes it that much more difficult to save the person, for lack of a better term. And I think that as community leaders in a border community, we have to take that into consideration, and taking this, moving this forward, and this becoming the first step, I hope will bring more attention to it, and we'll see further support from other border communities, where I think we're actually in a position where we have to be more diligent because there is more risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? I'll call the question. All those, before I do that, Mr. Cook, I understand that you've had some discussions with respect to this matter with Councillor Butler, and you've been able to identify where the $5,000 would come from.
I have.
Thank you. All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. That then takes, and Councillor McDermott, I understand that you are going to be postponing this until the next regular council meeting? Yes. Okay, and at that point in time, you'll be presenting a resolution?
Yes.
A motion. Okay. So that would be February the 20th, is that the 6th? That takes us to the bylaw package, and we know that 22-208 relative to the general levy operating budget needs to be removed from the package. And Madam Clerk, this is kind of an omnibus type of deal, but both Councillor Passero and I have declared pecuniary interest with respect to one item buried in these budgets. So I would think that we can vote on the understanding that we're not voting in support of either of our conflicts, rather than make this too convoluted. So Councillor Passero will be voting on this, but we've declared the conflict so that it's implicit that we're not voting specifically for those items that we have an interest in. Okay, Councillor Nutt.
Well, I have to thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. You
So,
saved me a lot
having said all that,
a lot of vocals.
Having said all that, Madam Clerk, I don't think we need to take this out of the package, unless you've got some. I think that's appropriate. That'll make
We
it.
also need to deal with notices of motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Nutt usually reminds me of what I miss. He must want to get home tonight. Are there any notices of motion this evening? Okay. Okay. One more bump off the road.
Excellent.
So, Councillor Nutt, unless there is someone who wishes any of these bylaws removed from the package, we can deal with the package as it is, with the clerk making the notation about the pecuniary interests of both Councillor Passero and I in bylaw 22. Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko, that bylaw package containing 22-2018 to adopt the general capital budget and general levy operating budget for the town of Fort Erie for the year 2018, with the footnote that the mayor and Councillor Passero both declared an interest on one specific item. That 23-2018 to amend bylaw number 111-2016 to adopt a winter control plan for 2016-2020. That bylaw 24-2018 to deem a certain registered plan of subdivision not be a registered plan of subdivision, Tom Nielsen and Joanne Jackson, part of 271 Ashwood Avenue, 4096 Glen Springs Road, and part 9 Cherrywood Avenue. And 25-2018 to amend zoning bylaw number 129-90 as amended, removing of holding provision for Black Creek Signature Phase 1, numbered company 91369-16, Canada Limited, owner Simon Mao and Gary Lau. That items 26-2018 to amend traffic bylaw number 2000-89 to increase the parking time limit within the Bridgeburg Station downtown business improvement area and increase the speed limit on Ridge Road North. -272018 to authorize the entry into an amendment and extension agreement with Rogers Communications, Inc. in regards to the telecommunication tower at the Crystal Ridge Community Center is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. So that bylaw package is on the floor for any questions or comments. Just wanted to say, with respect to the bylaw relative to amending the winter control plan, that's very, I think, helpful with respect to the sidewalks that have been identified and some of the road reclassifications, particularly with respect to, on the sidewalks, our efforts to increase and make easier the use of our public transit system. In any event, Councillor Zanko, you have third and final reading.
Yes, thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Nutt, that bylaws 22-2018, 23-2018, 24-2018, 25-2018, 26-2018, 27-2018 are given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Passero, you have the next resolution.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko, that bylaw number 28-2018 to confirm the actions of council at its meeting held on February 12th, 2018 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Butler, you have the next resolution.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that bylaw number 28-2018 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and clerk under the corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Are there any further meetings that haven't already been referred to this evening? If not, then, oh, look at that. Councillor Nutt, you have the final resolution.
Thank you, Your
Who
Worship.
would have guessed?
I don't know who would have guessed that. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko, that council adjourns at 8:56 p.m. to reconvene in a regular meeting of council on February 26, 2018.
Is anyone here opposed to this motion? Cool, then I'm gonna assume that we're all in favor. Thank you.